Hi, everybody. Today is May 31st, 2024, and I just want to share a scrap block quilt that I'm working on. You can see it behind me. You also can see that it's very early in the morning. I'm not fixed. I'm looking like I do when I quilt, and I'm by myself just quilting, a little ratty, a little tired, um, but very comfortable and very ready to quilt. And I wanted to share this very easy, beginner friendly, scrappy quilt block. I'm going to lower the camera so and continue to talk. So just give me a second. And here we are on my workstation by my sewing machine. One of the things that you will discover as a beginner quilter is that you end up with a pile of scraps. Now, we know that fabric costs a lot of money, and we want to utilize as much of it as possible. But sometimes you just do not know where to start. Now, there are many good YouTube channels out there that has free patterns. Mount Scrapmore, Brenda with Mount Scrapmore is one of them. We have Joe at Vintage Style by Joe, who works on scrap projects. Mona did what? Just did a project postcard with Marie for Marie's Scrappy Quilts. So there's many options out there, but sometimes you just do not know where to get started. And this is a little video for that. Now, I have been working on a few charity quilts, and I also purchased a gem box from Crystal Hearts Creations. I'll put her link in the description box. She is moving, and she had to sell a lot of her fabrics, and she was looking for assistance. And so I bought a gem box from her, and I had some wonderful fabrics that came in. Amongst the fabrics that came in were these beautiful squares that she had trimmed up. Some of these are mine, but these beautiful squares that I wanted to utilize in a quilt. I also had a whole bunch of extra strips from several of the charity quilts that I made for in Quilt Fest for Handmade by Ying with the the Ronald McDonald project, house project that they were doing. Anyway, so I don't want to waste my scraps. And you can see I have a whole bunch of scraps here, a whole bunch of beautiful blocks that I placed in a basket. So what I decided to do was to trim the big flowered pattern blocks down to 7.5 inches. And then I simply took these strips and sewed them together so I could get a 7.5 inch block. And I am in the process of sewing one up. So we'll go ahead and do that. As you're working on this is a good time to practice that 1/4 inch seam or stitch. And generally, I would just strip sew, but because I'm making this video, I'm going to use some 3-inch blocks that I have as leaders and enders. And you just find strips that you want to sew on there. It doesn't really matter what the color is. Um, it's a scrappy quilt. And what I'm looking for is a finished or completed strip set that will be a little over 7.5 inches. I am going to continue sewing, and then what I am going to do is give it a press once I have my strips completed. All right, so I have finished sewing some strips together. They can be any size strips. I normally do not do smaller than 1.5 inches and not any larger than 2.5 inches, but it is up to you. It's your quilt. What we're going to do here is we are going to go, and it doesn't matter. You don't have to line up anything perfectly. This is totally scrappy, totally just a freeing quilt to do. We're not trying to be very matchy here. And sometimes that's just good. If you like to sew, it's just nice to work on a scrap quilt and get a beautiful product at the end. So I'm just squaring this up to 7.5 inches. And then my scraps I place in a little scrap container or piece container to be utilized for other projects or to use as stuffing for a dog bed. Um, so anyway, we have a 7.5 inch block that I'm going to put away. And then if on my extra piece, I'm going to see if I can get another 7.5 inch. And I can. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut this. Turn this up. If you get a little salvage in there, that is fine. Most of the time, it's going to get lost in your seam allowance. So I can go ahead and make 2 blocks because I have this. Now, if you did not have enough to make a 7.5 inch square block, what I did is I trimmed these up to 2.5 inches. I took the leftover, made 2.5 inch rows, and then I sewed those together so I have a block unit with different size blocks. And I am going to go ahead and see if I can get 7.5 from there. Again, it doesn't matter. We are not trying to line anything up or match anything up. This is totally scrappy, totally just a fun little sewing project. Okay. So now I can go ahead to my sewing machine. And let me grab three additional solid or printed blocks. And I'm just going to go ahead and sew them together, right sides facing each other. The one thing I do want to let you know, and I'll show that when we go to the sewing machine, is that when you are sewing your block together, make certain that you're not stretching the fabric. I keep the strips on the top so that way I can kind of hold those seams down and it's not bulked up, but we'll show you that. Okay, here I am at the sewing machine, and one of these blocks, and I'm not being particular of what strip set I match with what block. I am just simply going to sew, taking my 1/4 seam. The seam allowance, keeping your 1/4 seam is important. That's why this is a good opportunity for you to work on that 1/4 seam and staying in that, having all your blocks utilizing a 1/4 seam, because then your blocks won't be so wonky when you go to put it together. I do use an awl, and sometimes that just helps me to feed my fabric under the sewing machine and keep those seam flat. This one, I am going to just go ahead and sew the strips facing in the opposite direction. And then here is that block that was made with 2.5-inch strips from the remnant portion of the strip sets. And again, it does not matter how you sew this on. You just want to keep the strip set block on the top, and it just helps control the stretching of the fabric. I am going to go ahead and take this to the ironing station. Now you don't have to iron. I find it just comes out a little bit better, but I am going to press to this block here, which is just my 7.5-inch piece of fabric. and we will come back. All right, so I've ironed out my fabric towards the 7 1/4 or 7 1/2 inch block, and now I'm just going to fold it together. Now, one of the things I did, and you do not have to do this because it's your quilt, is I went ahead and I just alternated how the strips went. So one is going one way, one is going the other way, and that just kind of gives it a fun texture. So I'm just gonna nest that seam right there. I'm not going to be very particular. I do pop a pin in it. If you watched any of my videos, I do tend to pin. But I'm going to sew this down, and I will be right back. All right, I have sewn my block together, pressed it open. This finishes at 14 inches by 14 inches. So it's a nice big block, and it will use up a lot of your scrap fabric and a lot of your odd-and-end blocks. I will say that if you have a small block, orphan block that you've been working on, and you do not know where to put it in, where to use it, you do not have it intended for a quilt, you can put it in your quilt or your block piece like this. It does not have to be 7 1/2 inches. I chose 7 1/2 inches because it was a manageable block, finished block for me. 14 inches is manageable, especially when I'm setting it out to make a quilt. But you can do it any size you want, bigger, smaller, whatever you have on your hand. You may have some smaller strips that will work better as a 5 inch, and you can work on those. If you do not have a lot of scraps because you've just begun your quilting journey, you can go ahead and make these up, set it aside, and when you have enough, you can go ahead and make a quilt with it. So again, I am just going to get out of the way. And this is the quilt that I'm working on. It is actually a charity quilt that I'm making for another YouTuber, Janice at the Right Way. I did tell her that I would make a few quilts for a charity that she is working on. So this is my donation to her. One of the things I love about scrappy quilts and using up that extra fabric that I have in my stash, not only does it leave room for me to purchase more fabric in the future, but it also helps me utilize that fabric and not be wasteful. And patterns and prints are fabulous for children. They can look at the patterns, they can run their fingers through it. There's a lot of movement to it, and there is nothing wrong with your beautiful blocks with your white backgrounds, but there is something to be said about a scrappy quilt that you're not worried if it gets a stain, if it walks through the dirt, if it goes on the grass, if there's food spillage on it, and you want it to be washed a million times, used a million times, and become one of your favorite things of comfort. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this short tutorial. Again, I want you to go out and use your scraps. So. Be blessed, be kind, and keep sewing. Bye, y'all.